Good evening, everyone. I would like to call this meeting to order. I guess I could do that louder, but I'm not the mayor. It is 5:29 p.m. and this is our Committee of the Whole meeting for March 21st, 2022. I hope everybody is patient with me as this is my first time chairing this meeting. And it is a packed house. I gotta tell you, no pressure at all at this point. So today we will start with the adoption of the agenda, and I just wanted to make note that there is an in-camera item being added to the agenda this evening. And so I am looking for a motion to accept the agenda as amended. Councillor Reid?
I'll move the agenda be accepted as amended.
Can I call the question stating all in favor? And that was voted in unanimously. I'd like to make a note that Councillor Nagel is going to be a few minutes late tonight, but he will be here, and Councillor Wilson is not feeling well, so he is off. So with that, we will move into the adoption of the previous minutes. I'd like to ask for a motion to accept the minutes of the February 22nd, 2022 Committee of the Whole minutes as attached. Thank goodness, Councillor Flowers. I would like to call in question that everybody's, no, wait a second. I'd like to ask for a motion to accept the minutes of the February 22nd meeting. All in favor? Now I'm gonna ramble. Okay, so now that I can breathe, I'm gonna bring up our first delegation, Mr. Belsey, as well as Ashley Hunt and Gabe Jennings. I'd like to invite them to the podium from RancheView School for a special delegation.
Hello, my name is Ashley.
And my name is Gabe. We are in Mr. Belsey's grade 6 class at RancheView School.
Thank you, Mayor Jeff Denung and the Cochran Town Council for giving this opportunity to have our voices heard. Thank you also to the Town of Cochran staff who have included us in tonight's meeting agenda.
Thank you to the media, parents, and guests who are also in the attendance.
This year, we have learned a lot about the importance of trees in science and about government and democracy and social studies.
Our class would like to ask if you would please consider our ideas that have come from these learnings.
We have done our research and created a presentation for you. Our classmates will now help us explain.
Gray jays are to the boreal forest what canaries were to coal mines. Gray jays use spruce trees like refrigerators to keep their food fresh as they cache it.
Gray jays are to the boreal forest what canaries were to coal mines. Canada's forests cover more than half of Canada.
Boreal forests seed the clouds above us with moisture. Boreal forests is the world's largest terrestrial ecosystem. Canada's boreal forests are home to more than 140,000 different types of living things. Trees release oxygen into the atmosphere during photosynthesis.
Trees absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere during photosynthesis. Healthy forests are called a carbon sink because they absorb more carbon dioxide than they produce.
Carbon dioxide can be stored within trees for decades. The North American boreal forest is the largest source of fresh water on Earth.
Fish are made of trees. 70% of the cellular composition of fish in Canadian lakes and rivers come from trees. Forests help clean water by acting like filters.
Most of Canada's drinking water comes from lakes and rivers.
75 million coniferous seedlings are planted in Alberta each year.
More than 20,000 Albertans work at jobs related to our forests.
Forestry is the third largest industry in Alberta after oil and gas and agriculture. Sawdust can be converted into biofuels. The forest industry provided 201,645 jobs, including 9,500 in Aboriginal communities in 2015.
Forests are responsible for removing approximately 1/4 of all emissions from fossil fuel use annually.
Approximately 70% of all Canada exports come from the forest industry. Top 3 forest production destinations. Number 1, USA, $22.1 billion. Number 2, China, $5 billion. Number 3, Japan, $1.4 billion.
In 2014, $22.1 billion of Canadians' gross domestic product was generated by the forest industry.
Law requires any harvested public lands to be replanted. In 2014 alone, more than 540 million seedlings were planted nationwide.
Canada is home to the third largest forest area in the world. Number 1, Russia. Number 2, Brazil. Number 3, Canada. Number 4, the United States of America. And number 5, China.
94% of the forests in Canada are controlled by the federal and provincial governments, so all Canadians own the forest.
Forest keeps us healthy.
Trees give us joy. All trees deserve love and care. Thank you to Rick Deans and show manager of the infrastructure for the town of Cochran. Trees give us joy. What do we propose? Canadian youth want to help make this happen. Cochran youth want to make this happen. In our community is the world we are inheriting from adults. It is our future.
2.2 billion trees have been, the government of Canada proposed that 2 billion trees will be planted within the next few years.
Make it easier for students to plant trees and around Cochran area schools. Direct town of Cochran staff to map out areas where students would be able to plant trees and communicate that information to RancheView, maintenance grounds, and caretaking as well as RancheView schools so that we can plant in June 2022.
Thanks to, sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to let this. I'm so sorry. Thank you to our project partner, Spread Like Sawmills. They're donating 300 white spruce seedlings.
Declare Cochran's official tree the white spruce tree. This white spruce tree is estimated to be over 300 years old and was
around long before the establishment of Cochran Ranch. Declare a Cochran Arbor Day, the first Saturday in June.
Proposal summary. Direct Town of Cochran staff to map out areas where students would be able to plant trees on or near their school grounds and communicate that information to Rocky View maintenance, grounds and caretaking as well as Rocky View schools so that we can plant trees in June 2022. Number 2, declare the white spruce as the official tree of Cochran. Number 3, declare the first Saturday in June annually as Arbor Day in Cochran.
We are the future. We can be leaders in the fight to save our world. We want to be part of creating a healthier world. Please hear us.
Thank you for the fabulous presentation. I wanted to start off by saying you probably all spoke more articulately than I did at the beginning of the meeting, so that's a bonus. Kudos to Mr. Belsey. You obviously have some very caring and environmental caring students, so that's always good to see. I would like to open it up to Cochran Council. Does anybody have any questions of our grade 6 students from RancheView? Councillor Flowers?
Thank you. What a fabulous presentation. Well done. I knew trees were important before, but now I learned some new facts. I had no idea that the Blue Jays use the spruce trees for their fridges. That's an interesting fact. And that the boreal forests seed the clouds with moisture. So there's lots of learnings here for us today, as well as you're sharing your passion and your enthusiasm. So thank you. I know we can't make decisions today at this meeting, but we're sure soaking up the information, and you gave us lots to think about. Thank you.
Councillor McFadden?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to just thank you and congratulate you all for your presentation. It was really well done, very informative, and really well put together, and you all did a great job presenting. And I wanted to thank you and your parents and your teacher for all, participating in how we make decisions. And as much as I learned great things about trees, it was also just great to be reminded how important and how energized our youth are. So thank you so much for everything you've done today.
Councillor Reid?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I thought it was great. The question I had, I want to echo some of what's been said already. And thank you to the parents, the teachers, and I did learn something new as well. I was just curious, why the white spruce as the official tree? Can someone answer that one?
Their tree is in Cochran and is over 300 years old.
So it's because of the, what do we call that tree?
Grandmother tree.
The grandfather tree. Because of the grandfather tree, you want to go with the white spruce?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Great job.
Mayor Janot?
Yeah, thank you. Great presentation, you guys. Super impressed. Not only everybody's been thanking everybody, that's awesome. The one thing that I'm impressed with is not only are you learning about government today, but you're actually utilizing your government and making positive change, so making good change in your community. The asks that you have before us are, I think, very timely. Council has been talking about trees, and maybe you would have seen along the Cochran Ranch where the highway is being widened, there's a few trees that have had to be taken out. And we were talking about what do we do and how can we replace trees like that. So you've brought forward a solution to that for us that we can utilize. And as Councillor Flowers has said, we don't make decisions today, so we won't be deciding whether or not we do this today, but I'm sure it will be on a future council agenda for us to make that decision. So I do I really want to say thank you to you for taking the time to come here tonight to present to council and make a presentation that really just brings good to Cochran for all the reasons that you have in your presentation. The one question I have is, well, one point I would make is that you're asking us to ask Rocky View School Division for you to allow, or to allow you to plant trees on the school site as well?
Yes.
Okay, great, to the point answer. I love that. So I think what I'd like to say is that Rocky View School Division, while we can certainly talk to them and say that we encourage them to have you do that, that would be a decision that Rocky View School Division would make. The decision that we would have to make would be around whether or not we have trees planted in town facilities, so parks and environmental reserves and municipal reserves, those types of areas in the community. So well done. I think that from my perspective, this is a good idea. We need to have more of these ideas come to us, and I look forward to the discussion when we get together and make the decision. But thank you so much for being here tonight.
Again, thank you for your presentation. I only have one question. How many of you have actually been to the grandfather tree?
Our whole class, pretty much.
To the point as well. Thank you so much again for presenting. Again, I share my similar feelings with all my colleagues. You guys did a great job up here. It's super nerve-wracking. I can relate to how you probably all felt. We will take the information and then we'll make a decision at a later date. But in the meantime, I wanted to ask if you guys would all like to take a picture with Cochran Council.
Yes, we would like that.
Perfect. So we're going to take a 5-minute recess and we will grab a picture with all of you fabulous students. And again, thank you for presenting, bringing awareness, and to your parents for bringing you here today.
And thank you for listening.
Should have a fan.
Okay, we'll get serious now.
I would like to welcome us back, and now we're moving into the business section of our agenda with 5A Western Heritage Design Framework, and I'd like to invite Mr. Norquist up to the podium to present.
Thank you, and good evening, Council. As mentioned tonight, I'm presenting the Western Heritage Design Framework. This is one of the projects that was broken out of the Land Use Bylaw project and is now being brought forward for separate consideration. So as just a quick introduction about why we are doing these changes, as we are taking a slightly different direction to Western Heritage in this framework, is in the process we found that there were three things that we wanted to improve on. First, we wanted to make sure that the framework and the direction that I was providing was going to be clear, reasonable, and consistent across the town. That way, both the town and business owners and developers would know how and why it was going to be implemented. Secondly, we also wanted it to be clear what was going to be private responsibility and what was going to be public responsibility. We also wanted the framework to align with best practices in both the province and across the nation. And finally, we wanted to allow the opportunity for new forms of architectural excellence in Cochran. So what is Western Heritage? And this is a question that we started early in our public engagement. And we found that it's mainly a concept that we use to communicate our identity. And there are two big concepts that were broken out. We have Western Heritage as we see it from the perspective of locals, where the focus is on conserving Cochran's special qualities and its historic identity. Whereas we do also have Western Heritage for visitors, that part where we use to brand Cochran as a unique place to spend time. And very much in the old guidelines, we've treated Western Heritage as a single architectural style, that kind of boomtown style that we see very common in our downtown. But we wanted to explore other stories, not just our settler era, but also the different industries that were in Cochran, as well as our history along the Beau River and the railway, which defines our town to this day. And we found that many of the things that in our public consultation people identified as our small town character were also just simply good design principles, such as complete streets, walkable environments, and having a strong support for small local businesses. So very much the shift has been away from a single architectural style and into communicating the stories that make Cochran unique. And to do this, we've identified three character areas within the town where we want to focus our efforts. First is the Old Town. So this is a historic town that is best known as the key location for all of our historic buildings. It is highlighted in yellow on our map here. We also have the Railway Transition Zone, highlighted in blue. And this has a character-defining aspect of the railway itself, but will also act as a transition from our historic downtown into more contemporary areas of Cochran. And finally, we have Cochran's corridors along our highways and Griffin Road. And while they don't have the same historic resources available to them, they still play an important part to visitors and passersby. And we'll be looking at ways where we can communicate those intangible themes to them. Everything outside of these areas will be considered contemporary Cochran. And that doesn't mean that they will be without design guidelines. It simply means that they won't be covered by this document. So the Old Town is our prime area that we want to focus on. As mentioned, it has a majority of our existing historic buildings and very much reflects that historic development pattern. It is a combination of both commercial properties and house form buildings that are converted. And because of that, we also decided that this area should encapsulate the entire settlement area. So we are no longer simply talking about the historic downtown. We've extended it all the way out to Bard Avenue. As we see that development is no longer just being focused in that core, but is slowly spreading along First Street East, as well as other one-off parcels within the East End. So the second character area is the railway transition zone. And very much the focus is going to be celebrating the railway as part of our history and one of the defining elements of our urban form. However, this is also a great opportunity to transition people who are maybe walking from our historic downtown into the more contemporary areas that have now been developed. This area is going to comprise of all the areas that touch the railway. So this is going to include the north half of Railway Street and the south half of First Street. This does mean that the part of First Street won't actually be part of our old town. However, this is actually in line with historic development, as most of the development along the railway has always been guided by the railway itself, such as railway stations, the grain elevator, or even a cattle yard for most of it. Most of the commercial development that we see there has happened more recent compared to the rest of the historic downtown and has its own unique urban form. So when looking across First Street, we want to make sure that both sides have a distinct character reflecting on their unique histories. Finally, we have Cochran's corridors. And as mentioned, there aren't as many resources present in these areas, especially considering it covers such a large portion of Cochran. And in the past, we've always treated highway commercial in the same way that we've treated buildings in our downtown, where we've asked them to fit a certain architectural style. Instead, we're going to be shifting more to a different approach, where we ask them to interpret those intangible themes or other lost historic features through installations that can be easily identified for visitors and motorists that are driving on the highway or maybe passing through Cochran. So, direction will be changing as well, whereas our guidelines were, as in the name, guidelines, suggestions that were used to guide developers and builders to something that may suit that architectural style. The objective I've pulled is roof styles, where it simply lists a series of roof styles that may be considered. In the new framework, we're moving to a two-tiered approach. We will have objectives that set out the intent for that character area, and these will be mandatory. They're high-level mandatory and will help both the town, builders, business owners know how that they can achieve those objectives. So in this example, the objective would be that new construction will contribute to the variation in small-scale, close-knit building forms that convey the quality of Cochran's historic small-town character. One of the guidelines provided is similar to the guideline in our old document, that the building should choose from a variety of roof forms that are present in the historic town. The guidance there is less away from following a list and more being contextual to the buildings around them. An example here is two different buildings on the same parcel. One is more traditional to what we would see in our old guidelines, and one has a more contemporary style as kind of a what-if scenario. Both of these buildings are still meeting the objectives in the new framework and are using very similar guidelines to do so. They're matching the height, they're using datum lines, so those long horizontal lines to match windows and entrances. They're using that buff brick material, but they do things a bit differently. They use different texture on the building facade and different placements of windows. But in both cases, this building was designed to fit with the historic building right beside it. And as mentioned, outside of the old town, so in the railway transition zone and along Cochran's corridors, we will be moving to a more heritage interpretation approach. And this means that we can tell our stories through different design, not simply building design. So this can vary from art installations, which can show historic character, or a stanza describing the area, or it can have plaques and panels that will show a map of what used to be in the area, or an image of a building that has long since disappeared. However, building design is still valid and will be encouraged in certain areas. And finally, there's also landscape design that will allow us to tell stories as people are interacting and walking through different sites. Another option that we're bringing forward in this document that's a departure from the old guidelines is the option for cash in lieu. This is a strategy that will be specific for the railway transition zone and Cochran's corridors. This is simply to give an option to developers, especially on Cochran's corridors, that may have constraints, or if we're dealing with larger national brands, that they may not be able to alter their building design. So in this example, there's a cross-section of Highway 22 here. And without cash in lieu, we could still have interpretive installations along each of these properties. And each would be unique and well-developed in their own right. However, cash in lieu gives opportunity to the town to make something more cohesive and coherent, allowing us to leverage the public realm along the highway to do things such as ranch-style landscaping or entrance features into that commercial area. So, the implementation and scope of this document. As mentioned, this document only covers specific things. So that is new buildings and new construction within those three character areas. We will also be looking at further supporting documentation in the future, such as a Heritage Interpretation Fund, which is simply guidance for how that cash in lieu money would be spent, as well as a thematic framework, which would help identify important historic resources or themes that could be used either within the framework itself or in the Heritage Interpretation Fund. But ultimately, this framework is supported by many of our other planning documents. So the preservation and protection of historic properties in Cochran are covered by our municipal development plan, as well as our land use bylaw. And as mentioned, that maintenance of small town Cochran and contemporary areas still has guidelines, and those are found in the land use bylaw, our areas and our area structure plans, where there are policies that are specific for improving streetscapes, making Cochran more walkable and friendly. And finally, for those new communities, again, we have the area structure plans and area redevelopment plans, as well as we have an integrated neighborhood design guideline to guide the development of those new neighborhoods. This document itself will actually be implemented through the land use bylaw. There is currently an overlay written in the document itself. However, this document will still need to be attached as an appendix. It will be fully integrated into the development permit approval process. So any permit or application we receive for any of those character areas will automatically be reviewed under this framework. And it is supported by many of the policies and regulations already in the land use bylaw. And this will allow the town to seek compliance and use some of those new tools that are and use the tools that have been provided in the new land use bylaw, such as ensuring compliance or using conditions to help projects meet the framework. And as part of this, we will be asking that any applicant within these three areas will submit a design brief. Again, simply showing how they're going to be meeting each of the design objectives. So that is my summary of the full framework was attached in your agenda, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the information, Mr. Norquist. I'm going to turn it over to my council colleagues to find out what questions they have for you. Mayor Janung?
I didn't expect to be first, but here goes. Thanks for the presentation. I actually really appreciate the approach of splitting this out of the land use bylaw. I think that was a really smart way to accomplish this and really separate the two things. But I guess the first question was the last part of your presentation, and that was, this will be a part of the land use bylaw is how you see it. So will that be an amendment to the land use bylaw and added as an appendix, is what you mentioned, but how will the teeth of the Western Heritage Design Framework, I'm trying to come up with an acronym, I can't yet, but how will that function?
Yes, through the chair. So this framework will be part of the land use bylaw itself. There will be a amendment that will be brought forward to attach this as part of the document itself. As mentioned, there is already regulations for the overlay within the document, but essentially the land use bylaw and the framework will be one of the same. So when we're reviewing an application, we would give equal weight to the building setback mentioned in the district as well as the objective listed in this framework.
Okay, so my understanding is that anything that whatever the final form of this is, it's part of the land use bylaw and therefore will be upheld within the land use bylaw itself.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. I'm stumbling here because this is a relatively new way of applying Western Heritage. I think this is maybe anecdotal, but for the longest time we've been applying it blanketly to the whole community and trying to be something everywhere all the time. And I appreciate the work, I guess, of splitting it into defining what areas that we really want to see Western Heritage, and then the rest will be left up to each of those communities on their own. That's the correct interpretation of that?
Yes, the intent very much is that we do have important historic resources and there are key areas where we can focus our efforts, but we also do need to allow room for these new communities to develop their own identity as well.
Exactly. Okay, thank you. So a question I think that, and this is outside of the exercise of the Western Heritage Design Framework, it's going to take me a while to get that one, is that we need to do the work of identifying what it is that we want to be so that this can achieve that for us. It may be that already, but I think that as we get into strategic priority sessions later in the week and have a dialogue in the future, I think we really need to do a good job of defining what it is, whatever it is. And then I think this is a good tool to do that. How are we defining everything else is a question. So the other neighborhoods, so a area structure plan comes forward and there's a neighborhood plan developed. That is where I think we need to now be able to, and I think why we've gotten off why we've lost our focus maybe on Western Heritage guidelines, trying to apply them everywhere in every neighborhood. So what tools and how are we going to uphold that in those specific neighborhoods? I know it's outside of this document, but.
Yeah, through the chair, so like when a new neighborhood is coming forward to be developed, there's the key tool will be the area structure plan. As council reviews it, one of the items will be if they are implementing their own design guidelines. We do have our integrated neighborhood design guidelines as well, which is a document that we have on our site to help guide developers come in and how they can set up their area structure plan and some of the elements we want to see. So those would be the two key documents that the town already has in place or would be for council to review as they come in.
Okay, thank you. I thought I knew the answer there. So I guess another comment I would have is that, and I've said this numerous times, leveraging our desirability, and I think that's something where while we work on our identity and what it is that we want to be, that we keep that front of mind. And I think this tool allows us to do that. The one thing that I have like a little bit of, I guess, indifference to at this point, but maybe it's a stumbling block. I want to hear what everybody else has to say, and that's the cash in lieu. While I understand the premise of it and what it is, that how we will achieve that, I think I'm worried that it might pass a problem onto the town itself So if a developer, and I understand why, you know, some of these bigger boxes or big chains don't accommodate our look and feel that we're trying to achieve. But I think it's important that if we're going to do that, that we define what it is that we're going to do with that money, that cash in lieu. I think you spoke to that, but defining that first is going to be a requirement. Otherwise, we're going to be left with what we feel is Western heritage interpretation, and I think that's going to leave a lot of gray area, whether it be a council decision or administrative, or maybe the public weighs into what a public art piece might look like. I would hate to get us into that bind, and that we actually define it first and then say your cash in lieu is going to build this if you choose that option. So I'm not sure if this process allows for what I just described.
Through the chair, right now, how we have it set up is we are looking at the adoption of the framework first, as that's going to be key to guiding most of the development that would be falling in these character areas. And then immediately after, it would be a development of that heritage interpretation fund, which would again be a policy that would help clearly define that the cash that is collected as stipulated in the framework itself, about where it would going, what type of projects would be applicable for it, and who would be the decision or the decision-making authority. And that would be up to, we can work with council to decide if that will be council, if it will be members of the public, or if it would be administration.
Yeah, I think all three of those answers are problematic in my view. I just, similar to, and I know you're familiar with this, but the cash in lieu for parking. I've often heard a complaint in the community about, well, it just goes into this pool and we don't know where it's gonna go or if it's ever gonna get built, so I just sign a check, and there's this grumbling about it. I'd like us to find a way to define that in a way that people know where their money's going, and I know the system that you've described kind of does that, but if it doesn't get built within a certain few years, or the time starts to drag and we're collecting a pool of money for something, councils change, I'd rather see us define that somehow. I don't have the answer for that, but that's my comment at this point. But overall, I think it's a good document, and I support most other than what I've described, so thank you.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you. The mayor has asked some of the questions I had as well. I was concerned about the cash in lieu. I'm in that same vein, you know, if a developer comes along and says, you know, the Western Heritage Design Framework was great, but I'm going to add a piece of historic art and landscape, can they simply get away with that in terms of being acceptable and design whatever building they wish?
Through the chair, so with the heritage interpretation piece, it's very much tied to how we look at cash in lieu. So that the requirement in the framework is that 1% of the building cost will either go to an interpretation piece, as discussed with administration on the site itself. So that could be within the building design itself, or it could be a plaque, a statue, landscaping treatment, or that the money be, again, given to the town so that the town could use those funds to do something in the public realm.
So the simple answer is yes, a developer could, either in cash in lieu and or some interpretive piece and landscaping, get away with having a building of whichever they wish.
Yes, the option is with the developer.
Okay. If I could, just a couple more questions. The railway transition zone, and again, let me preface this by saying this is not the first time council's seen this, or at least most of this material, and I think I asked this question previously, but I can't remember what the answer was. Can you help me appreciate the south side of First Street, what that railway transition looks like? Like what would it, like the back of those buildings, well, most of those buildings I think are relatively new, and so the back of those buildings would fall under what would have traditionally been just the back of the building, and now nobody's gone into any trouble to kind of emphasize the railway. Is that what your intent is, or like I'm just trying to get my head around that?
Yes. Well, through the chair, I'll maybe try and go in a bit more detail if I can find the right slide. I think this will need to do for now. So part of the railway transition zone is to celebrate that feature that the railway has defined how Cochran has developed. So yes, the treatment of the rear of buildings could be something we look at, but we're also looking at how, if you're walking along First Street, how you might appreciate the railway. That doesn't necessarily mean hiding it, but maybe the example I have on the slide here are the partition walls that give a nice image for you to look at, but has a, trying to remember the word off the top of my head. There are cutouts, so you can at least, if the train is going by, you can see that motion while still being protected from some of the vibrations and noise.
Okay. If I could, just a couple more questions. So west on First Street and beyond Fifth Avenue, is that part of the railway transition?
So the railway transition would go from basically Highway 1A all the way to town boundaries. So it would include parcels within Griffin Industrial Point that would face some of the residential portions in the East End. But it wouldn't necessarily extend past Highway 22.
Okay, so the part I'm asking about is where the fast gas station is and the building beside it. That little bit there is part of their railway transition?
Yes.
Okay. And then the corridor zone, does that include the old KFC town site?
No, through the chair, the old town hall site is part of the old town.
Okay.
So yeah, it would be the same way that we treated the historic downtown in the past. It would need to meet some of our most stringent regulations.
So where does the downtown and the corridor zone in that area, where does that transition occur?
So I'll start with the old town here. So again, it is that triangle that of our old settlement area. So it's between all the properties between Highway 1A and First Street, as well as those properties along 2nd Street and 3rd Street on the north side of Highway 1A.
Okay.
And then basically any other property that fronts either the highways would then be part of Cochran's corridors.
Okay.
So as you can see, moving east into Glen Eagles, that's where the corridor starts to pick up parcels.
Okay. And then what about the corridor zone? Does that include any interior roads like Griffin Road?
Yes, Griffin Road has been added to the Cochran corridors.
Okay. And I had one other question, I think. No, I think that's it for now. Thank you. Again, you know, I appreciate your work in this, and I'm glad Samir has said that we're moving forward with this, and I better understand where it now fits into the overall scheme of things. So that was really a takeaway for me tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Hyman, I saw your light quickly flash on and off. Did you want to make any comment at all?
No, Mr. Nordquist answered the question, so he beat me to it.
Thank you. Councillor Flowers?
Thank you for the presentation. It's an extensive document, and I apologize I didn't read all 50 or 60 pages, so some of my questions might have been answered if I had. Can you just describe to us where it was not being applied consistently before and what will be different about that?
Yes, for sure. So one of the main issues with the old guidelines was it was built on that boomtown architectural style, which it works very well for McKay's and those kind of commercial businesses, but it starts to fall apart when you're looking at things like gas stations. Like how do you incorporate an arcade and a canopy into a gas station while still maintaining its functionality? And those issues get worse the larger the site or the more specialized the building is. Those architectural stylings were very much meant for our main street and those smaller businesses. So as we, the one example that always jumps to mind are car dealerships. These are large buildings that their scale would have never been even imagined in historic Cochran. So we've definitely, even more recently, have been looking at better ways to work with those businesses that are located outside of our downtown to incorporate elements where they can, but it doesn't necessarily always mesh with what the intent of the building is, and can kind of look a bit false or tacked on.
I know that schools and big box stores were always a problem. Lots of going back and forth about those. Would communities still be encouraged, like Sunset, to have a nice entrance at Western?
Yes, for sure, and that would be something that, again, through the ASP, something that you would look at is there a seam that is set out within this neighborhood itself? Is there a particular brand that will be associated, or are they looking at setting up their own guidelines?
And the railway, I know you talked about the pedestrians looking at the train, but my concern was more about the people going on the train looking at the backs of the businesses. Will they be encouraged to make something nice for that?
Yes, this zone was definitely developed in mind with the commuter rail. So it is going to be, again, there's going to be some permeability between the buildings in the railway zone and First Street and the railway, so that there is still a view of Cochran, as well as the buildings themselves, to be conscious that they will need to be viewed from both sides.
And a thought about the Indigenous artwork. Did you discuss including that in the Western themes and for art around town?
So through the chair, we didn't actually look at any specific themes. The framework is very much a tool to allow stories to be told. What Direction Council could provide is, again, talking about that historic framework or a heritage interpretation plan, which would be a document that sets forth which themes or resources are available to the town. Again, very much like our old guidelines, it didn't necessarily discuss the stories, it was just asking for specific requirements to be met on the building. Where right now, this framework on its own will ask that people tell stories on their site. We don't specify what kind of stories. Okay. And we hope that we can work with the developer and find something unique.
Hopefully we can discuss that too at strategic planning, and I like the idea of incorporating what we come out of there with into this document. But thank you, well done.
Councillor McFadden?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for the refresher on the document. I know we've been talking about this one off and on for an extended period of time. Yeah. And there's like a lot of thought and analysis, put into it, and I do appreciate the different lens. I do struggle, just for the starting point though, this isn't, any existing building isn't going to have to adapt to this. This is going to apply to any new building or new development that happens, right?
Correct. And just to be clear, new development would include any additions or alterations to existing buildings. So if a business in the downtown came in and they were redoing their facade, this would apply to that.
Type thing. Yeah, so I just wanted to get clear on that. So when we're saying the railway transition on First, that's the side where it has the provincial government building, that whole side, right? Mm-hmm. And so kind of a concern I have right now is I feel that kind of the western part of that, the two sides of First mirror each other very well and they fit overall. So I'd be concerned that if one side is sticking with kind of our historical downtown, the other side of the street is now in this railway transition. I don't know, I just don't feel it's going to blend so well. So I have concerns there, and I have to admit I'm not really sold on the whole railway transition piece because of that, because we have so much of that in there, even south of the tracks. Just thinking about how the quarry's been built out, and Fifth, a lot of what we were doing with the historic pieces is already there. So then to be bringing in the railway stuff afterwards, for me, anyway, still a hard sell for me is the short version of that. I am liking the approach to the major corridors, and can be in support of the cash in lieu for the major corridors to allow those businesses that are participating there to chip in, and then maybe as a municipality we could do some, better entry features or something that honors that. So I certainly appreciate where we're coming from with the major corridors. Following up on the major corridor question, so I see we've identified Griffin is on there. But James Walker is going to be a future major corridor. Is the intent to identify that right off the top to be part of this, or how can we bring that in?
Through the chair, that will be something that will be looked at as James Walker Trail gets developed. Right now, the portions of Griffin Road that we're looking at are very much opportunities where we can develop and integrate it within our existing fabric. There are some opportunities there to leverage the few historic resources that maintain, such as the barn from the old Griffin Ranch. However, as we're looking at James Walker Trail as it develops south of the river, we are looking at, again, more greenfield, and so it is something that will be considered in the future for sure, but it wasn't an immediate consideration as part of this document.
Okay, I would almost prefer the lens that, you know, we know James Walker's gonna happen at one point, hopefully, but that we plan with those expectations, that we want it to be, you know, tell that Western heritage story and to be part of these corridors would be something I would lean towards. And then previous conversations we've had, again, I'd like to see if it's possible for us to take that more intensified Western heritage look that you're presenting or some other option and make sure that Griffin, River, Fifth and Railway, kind of those downtown corridors, also have kind of a, you know, a focus of this, because so much of our travel, one way or the other, is on those, and so I'd like those to be respected in those too. So I know your presentation was kind of just a refresher where we're at before, but by and large, my concerns from last year still exist. So.
And through the chair, we did, based on our last strategic session with council, we did look at those additional pathways or corridors, but we did also feel that council's existing corridor plan is implementing lots of the things that we would like to see on those streets. That small town feel, again, isn't necessarily tied to Western heritage, but simply good design principles. So there are already plans and policies in place to make sure that both Fifth Avenue and Railway are going to be the best possible streets that they are.
No, and that was the intent of those corridor plans, was to get those good design features. I just feel that that's really an opportunity to celebrate that Western heritage. So anyhow, overall, there's a lot of work been put into this. I'm just still very uncomfortable with a number of points on it. Just wanted to share that here. So, thank you.
Mr. Hyman?
I just wanted to supplement one of Mr. Nordquist's comments or responses to Councillor McFadden, where South Pole Landing is a significant portion of James Walker Trail, and I would anticipate that the neighborhood plan for that will come with significant amendments, and then at that point, council will have an opportunity through that planning process to provide some input on that corridor, and that's a significant portion of James Walker Trail. There is also development that Mr. Popoff's been recently been working on with John Robinson, which is a further extension of James Walker Trail. So I think there's going to be an opportunity, and the only other thing I would say is, much like the land use bylaw, this is a living document. So as we have this entrenched, there's opportunities that it will evolve over time and certainly improve. So I just wanted to provide that comment as well.
Excellent. Thank you for the context.
Councillor Nagel?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time really understanding what the difference is between the railway transition zone and the old town, and then I guess the Cochran corridor. So like the old town will have the rigid architectural controls applied, but then what exactly is the transition zone? Like, what is the policy that will be applied to it?
So through the chair, again, the old town, when we look at it, it has most of our historic resources. So the policies in that area were very much there to ensure that any new construction matches that. So that's where we set out those things such as requirements for height or matching the streetscape. Whereas, again, the railway transition zone has a very different history, and the feature that we're trying to celebrate there isn't a particular building, it is the railway itself. So some of the policies, again, they will be similar to how it is in the old town, but it is more trying to respect that that railway is what we're celebrating instead of a specific building.
Okay. So I think I'm kind of happy with that. And then with the corridors though, is it basically that there are no guidelines in the corridors? That if you're not in the transition zone or the old town, then basically any new developments in the corridors can kind of be whatever they want as long as they're quote telling the story. Is that what this is?
Through the chair, there is a mandatory objective, and that is that heritage interpretation piece. Again, we are moving away from that necessarily being building design, but more the opportunity for art installations or sculptures. Again, we are being more mindful that this area is going to be mainly viewed by motorists, and some of the design elements for buildings don't always fit or achieve that objective. So it is not saying that there will be nothing, but it does allow more flexibility for builders and developers.
Yeah, I guess my concern, just in speaking in broad strokes, I don't necessarily want to be prescriptive of what people have to build in these corridor areas. Like, you know, it doesn't have to look like the old Cochran Hotel or McKay's. But I want to make sure we're doing something to protect Cochran's identity. My concern is we move forward with this policy and everything outside downtown Cochran just looks like every other subdivision in the new parts of Calgary, and we lose our identity. So I just want to make sure we're doing that. So can you give myself and the rest of council some level of assurance that in these corridor areas, it's not just gonna be a free for all, like, you know, build everything like whatever you want? How do we make sure Cochran has a rich culture and identity?
Yeah, for sure. And I guess I would point to one, maybe the more recent developments. North Star Ford was one where we had lots of trouble getting the building itself to adhere to our requirements, just due to what Ford at a national level required. So we worked with them to install landscaping sculptures on their site. And while that story doesn't tell us, that site doesn't tell a story of a particular building, it instead tells the history of how mobility evolved in Cochran, going from horseback riding to cart to the automobile. And that's what we would be more looking at for any other development along the highways. If they can't make their building work, look at how they're treating their site, and if there's something that they can use to interact with either motorists or pedestrians.
If I could just add something to that as well, in the case of North Star Ford, I think it's a great example, and certainly we had a very willing owner in Mr. Giles, who went out and actually purchased the stagecoach and really embraced the idea. But we struggled when he first came in, Ford was saying, we can't move forward with what you're trying to do. So he was very innovative. I think what this framework provides is better solutions for us to achieve exactly that. With the Western Heritage Design Guidelines, it was really, as Adam or Mr. Nordquist is saying, it was really building design. So we're trying to be creative on the fly. This framework gives us more teeth to achieve that. Okay. The other thing I would share too is we have engaged developers throughout Cochran as part of this process, got their input, and they have very much said, yes, we'd be willing to look at these different creative ways rather than everything trying to look like historic downtown.
So I think we're all on the same page in terms of like the spirit of it. I'm just not really clear on how this manifests into actual policies that council can pass to make sure this stuff happens. Will there be specific bylaws or policy changes coming to council to reflect this document?
Well, I think as Mr. Nordquist put in his presentation, this would provide us the framework for those discussions, which would allow us to have those conversations at a pre-application stage. Our opportunity to influence applications is very early with this in place. And then John and Mr. Popoff and his team, and we'll be working, meeting with applicants, identifying this very early new land use bylaw. The component of the new land use bylaw is the Western Heritage Design framework. And then that, the opportunity to influence that, have those discussions, and then the different areas throughout town, I think we're gonna have much better outcomes and much more consistent as well.
Okay.
And sorry, just to add to that, because this is part of the land use bylaw, it is going to be incorporated into our development permit review process.
Okay.
So if administration felt that a site wasn't doing enough to meet this objective, we could easily send it back and request changes or refuse it outright. If a developer wanted to challenge or make changes, or we have the opportunity through existing tools such as a subdivision and development appeal board, or if there's something where it may be a bit more controversial, or it may be unclear if it's meeting it. We also have the Cochran Planning Commission that we can refer these applications to, and they would review it again like any other development application with the same weight and the same ability to put conditions on or requirements for the developer to meet.
Okay, excellent. That's what I was trying to figure out. I like to hear that. My final question is, what will happen to Greystone? Because the ASP and neighborhood plan have already been passed. So at what point do we get to influence Greystone's design? Since it's being pulled out of the Western Heritage Design Guidelines.
So through the chair portions will still be, since they front Griffin Road, will still need to comply with the Cochrane Quarters portion of the framework, but the more interior portions will follow the design guidelines that that were identified in the Greystone neighborhood plan themselves.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Flowers?
Just one more comment that I forgot to mention. The Cash in Lieu project, it would be great to work with our local historical group, CHAPS. They have lots of ideas, they know the stories and the history, but they don't have a lot of money, so it could be a good partnership there.
Mayor Janelle?
Yeah, just maybe one last question as well, is as Councillor Nagel was speaking and trying to find clarity around how we would apply this, it triggered a question. Is there another community that is modeling a similar behavior than what that we're contemplating with this? And maybe not so much heritage, maybe it's in another way. Is there a community that we could look to emulate or to at least study so that we understand how this could be applied and how it's worked out for them over a longer term?
Through the chair, the practice of using overlays in a land use bylaw is not uncommon and has seen success in some communities, but it very much depends again on what the direction from council is for what they want to see in that overlay, and then the willingness for developers to meet that. So very much this needs to be, I guess, a conversation of if what the direction council wants to see and how we can, again, make changes throughout the process. It is a living document. Council always has opportunity to amend or request changes to the document itself if they find something specific isn't working. However, it is, again, it's using existing tools that we have in the land use bylaw to implement our vision for Western heritage.
Yeah, I guess I understand the overlay and the tactics that are being taken, and I agree with them. It's the what and the how, or not so much the how, I guess. It's the outcome of, is there another community that picked a theme or an identity that they wanted to emulate in their design or character of their community and put planning principles in place to see that outcome? And then that's more where I'm going. Is there, and often when we do some of these visioning sessions, we, hey, pick a community that sticks with us. And I'm not saying that again. I'm just saying that, is there a community that has applied a similar principle? And it doesn't have to be around Western heritage. Maybe it's Disney, right? So we'll start that rumor again. So if it's Disney, then has there been a community that has done that well, that we could look at and go, okay, I get that. If we stick to our corridor plan here, this is what it could look like. And maybe you don't have the answer today, but maybe that's something we could come back and.
Well, and I don't have all of the background, but I would suspect, and just speaking with Ms. Van Kuypema, who used to live there, Canmore, in terms of the design that they're trying to achieve, they have very specific requirements.
Okay, so that's a mountain town character they're trying to stick to. Is that a similar, have they used a similar tool than as what we're, an overlay into the land use bylaw?
I believe it's an overlay within their land use bylaw. I'm not as familiar with it directly, but
it is part of the land use bylaw, I believe.
I guess where I'm going is that, and maybe we don't have the answer tonight, but maybe you could look at, Canmore might be a close, perfect example of here's what they've done here. This is the outcome, and we can say, we like that. Okay, we get it. And this is the principle that they applied to it.
Yes, and through the chair, it's just, I'm trying to kind of walk between what, basically, the Disneyland comparison is the one I have the most trouble with, because this is what this document's trying to avoid, actually. This document isn't, again, to be clear, that this document isn't trying to replicate an architectural styles throughout the town of Cochran. It's looking at conserving and celebrating what we already have. So especially like in our old town, new buildings aren't going to look like what is already existing. They're going to be complementary or subordinate to what is there, so that the things like the Rocky View Hotel will have that opportunity to shine while you're going down First Street, that there won't be a new 5-story glass office tower beside it. It's using what we already have and putting it up on a pedestal for everyone to see.
Yeah, and I love that. I think that we're on the right track there. I was just looking for a similar, maybe the Disney was the bad one. But last comment, Mr. Nordquist, I've really appreciated your presentation tonight. Your clear, knowledgeable ability to answer our questions tonight. You obviously know this document inside and out. Great job. Thank you.
Councillor Reid?
Just the Disney example may have been a bad example.
Disney World.
That's right. Would Leduc or Canmore or Camrose be examples of communities that have done this type of thing? I mean, just kind of visualizing driving through those communities and seeing similar kind of themes, although not a Western theme, obviously, but where they're trying to preserve a downtown area. And again, I don't know if either of those communities are a good example or not, but I'm just trying to, I think that's where the mayor was going in terms of that. And again, I'm not looking for an answer tonight, but it's easier to appreciate some of the things and what's being proposed. Particularly, admittedly, I, like my colleagues, have some concerns about getting my head around the corridor zone and just, to Morgan's comment about a potential free-for-all there. There's just some way to being able to have examples of good examples of how these things might work, and even if they're piecemeal. That's, I think, what the mayor was looking at. And then to his comment, yeah, this is obviously your wheelhouse in terms of this area of expertise. I sometimes find that the expertise runs counter to what the developers might want, and so some real life experiences are really helpful in terms of being able to appreciate just how this would work. So thank you.
Now that my colleagues are done, I do have a couple questions of my own. When it comes to the businesses along the Cochran corridor, how long would they have, say, to erect like an art project or panels or some sort of artwork? Is there a timeline that they would have to meet to be able to put those pieces up?
So through the chair, that would very much be in discussion during the development permit approval process. Typically, as a practice, we allow 2 years for a development to be complete. However, depending on circumstances, they can come back and ask for a time extension if it is appropriate.
And would somebody be, I don't want to say enforcing or patrolling, it's probably not quite the right word, but would somebody be looking into what these projects are? Because course, a business could come forward initially with an idea, but that might not be exactly what they actually build. Is somebody going to be kind of watching as to what gets done?
Yes, through the chair. So the design brief will be part of the application and part of their approval. So we can follow up and ensure that it was completed to what was proposed in the same way that we would check setbacks or landscaping under our current bylaw. We now have the tools in our land use bylaw to leverage our municipal enforcement to take different steps in actually enforcing if it's a breach of condition or if it's something else completely. However, we also do have practices such as ability to enter into a development agreement and take securities to ensure that a site is developed appropriately.
And then one more question. I know that you had said this would be brought forward as an amendment and that, developers were consulted along the way. And I know that there's been, a lot of discussion even through Cochran Planning Commission. But will there be a period, especially after this presentation, for community to kind of weigh in or the business community to kind of weigh in at some of these ideas coming forward?
So through the chair, because we are amending the land use bylaw, it does need to go through the same process as the bylaw was adopted. So there will be a mandatory public hearing and advertising in the paper.
Okay, perfect. And then I guess my only last question is, I share a lot of the same concerns that my colleagues do. When it comes to the cash on lieu, if we kind of put that out there, are we, I don't want to say encouraging businesses to kind of take the easy way out? And is that a concern that if we offer this as a possible solution that we're going to see more people go to the cash on lieu side than actually kind of working with us to keep that Western heritage flair?
Through the chair, it will definitely be a balance, and this might be something we will need to periodically review. But we did, again, set that percentage of what we were going to collect on what we felt would be appropriate for what we've seen for development, that it would be enough of an incentive to find synergies within the building or the landscaping themselves, if appropriate, or if a site is simply too constrained, it wouldn't be prohibitive to develop the site altogether.
Perfect, thank you. That's it for my questions. Council, any more questions? No, then I guess you don't have to. Oh,
sorry, just before you conclude there, I think if I may jump in, I appreciate the dialogue here, and just as we continue to become more familiar with the committee of the whole option, I think one of the things that we want to get in the habit of doing is just clarifying the kind of general tenor of the direction we received, which if I may make an attempt at that, and I'll be happy for council to direct otherwise, is that they would like to see this undergo a little bit more work before it was to come forward formally for consideration, up to and including things like perhaps some other communities that maybe have used a similar tool, and the impacts and outcomes that have been generated there would be helpful. So the next step from this would be approaching council in a committee of the whole setting again with some additional information.
Mr. Derricott, you nailed it. You should be sitting in this chair. Councillor Nagel?
What was the percentage for the cash on lieu again?
1% of the construction cost of the building. So it wouldn't incorporate the land or any utility installations or servicing for the site.
I'd personally like to see that increased. I'm not sure if that answers or goes to the question you just raised, Mr. Derricott. And yeah, in summary for my comments, I like the direction of everything. I just want to make sure the document's going to work is my thing. I just want to be convinced of that if possible.
Thank you. And I will add as well that I do think this is a very timely conversation, considering we're going to spend a few days this week considering that higher level kind of picture of how we envision Cochran growing with identity. I think if I can use a terminology, and these are the pieces that are, I think, going to guide it. And as you said, it's only good if it actually impacts the outcome. And so we want to make sure that we have an efficacious or an effective outcome as well, not just one that looks nice in its document form, but that it's actually, impacting the outcomes.
Mayor Janelle?
Yeah, around the 1%. Maybe when we come back with another iteration of this, a high level, like what is the average cost of a development? I mean, if it's $5,000, we're talking about, you know, just so we get an order of magnitude of what the 1% means, and then we can have a conversation about whether we agree 1 is the number, or is it going to suit the needs that we have? Like, and if it's a bronze statue at every corner, what, maybe that's, then we know the cost of that. Maybe we're missing the mark. So, thanks.
Councillor Reid?
Yeah, just to pick up on that as well, I'd be curious to know what it actually costs to you know, on the average, to have a building look in terms of the Western heritage. Is it more than 1% or less than 1%? And that would really help me make an informed decision about whether 1% is appropriate or not. So if it costs 2% to be able to live within the heritage guidelines and contribute to the community that we want, make it rich and culturally satisfying, but they can get away with just paying 1% in terms of cash in lieu and walk away and do what they wish, and that's not much of a deterrent. So yeah, I'd be curious to what does it actually cost? I guess an example would be the Shoppers Drug Mart, like kind of out of the water tower feature and some kind of Western features there. What would that cost in terms of in today's dollars and a percentage basis? So that would be helpful for me.
So Council, as Mr. Derricotte said, we'll take this back and we'll look at the framework, and it'll be brought back and be up for further discussion, obviously in strat planning in the next few days. So we will look forward to see it come forward in a little bit. I've been asked if we could take a quick 5-minute break, Mr. Norquist, and you're back up. I'm sure you could use the break yourself. So I'll see everybody back here in 5 minutes, which would be 6:56. We are back live. We're sorry, everybody. We're a few minutes late. I guess I had a pretty tight timeline there for everybody to take a bit of a break. We are back, and we are moving on to item 5B, the 2021 Development Summary Report. And Mr. Norquist, you are back up at the podium.
Yes, hello again. So yeah, I'm also presenting our 2021 Development Summary Report. Every year, planning comes forward with just a summary of new home builds, development permits, and other statistics that we have collected throughout the year. So the main report is attached in your agenda, so I'll just do a quick overview as well as some important statistics updates about our balance of dwellings and our land supply. So our 2021 overview, we had 606 new units built, so this is double from 2020. We saw significant population growth, about 5%. We had 208 development permits received. 53 of them were for non-residential. And our land supply projections have increased. And with all this in mind, would always like to remind council that these new build rates are market driven, and regardless of how much is approved or land supply that exists, we're going to see change year to year. So when we look at the balance of dwellings, we're mainly referring to our growing neighborhoods. Currently we have capacity for another around 8,000 dwellings. 800 of them already have subdivision approval, whereas the remainder only has land use. So in these 9 growing neighborhoods, around 478 of those homes were built there. So when we look at the balance of dwellings without land use, these are our planned neighborhoods, and we currently estimate that they can support 2,000 dwellings. We only have 3 current neighborhood plans that have been approved, but land use has not been granted. So when we calculate our land supply, we are looking at the 10-year trend of new homes that are being built. This year was the busiest year since 2015, and we're now looking at an average rate of 583 dwellings per year. And if we exclude 2014 and 2015 as they're a bit of an anomaly when you look at the rest of the data, our average rate goes down to about 500 a year. So we use these to estimate the lower and upper bounds. So when we're looking at that land supply for residential development, we're looking at between 14 and 16 years. And for the section without land use, that's an additional 3 to 4 years, giving us a total land supply of 18 to 20 years. So, and we also provide 3 population scenarios. So first, the dwellings with subdivision not yet built, so that's at 800 potential dwellings. And this represents a 1.5 year land supply for the next 2,000 residents that will come to Cochran. We also look at the dwellings with land use. So again, that is one of the upper potentials. So 14 to 16 year and another 21,000 residents. And finally, when we look at all potential dwellings that are covered in this report, we're getting up to 26,000 new residents for a total population of 58,000 within Cochran. Again, that's the 20-year horizon though. The third factor that we look at in the report is our water license. Under current availability, we can support a population of around 40,000. And with our current population from the most recent government census being 32,000 residents, we're looking at about another 7,800 residents or 3,000 dwellings. And this is approximately 5 to 6 years. So it would be all of our lands that have been subdivided as well as 2,200 dwellings yet to be subdivided. So in summary, our average building rate is between 500 and 580 dwellings per year. We have about 14 to 16 years of land supply with land use, and then another 3 to 4 without land use, giving us a total estimate of 18 to 20 years. We have usually a 1 to 2 year land supply of rolling subdivisions, and a total estimated future population of 58,780 residents. However, our water availability does limit that, and we're looking at a potential additional 3,000 dwellings, before the license would become an issue, which is estimated to be in the next 5 to 6 years of residential land supply. So that's a summary of the report. As I mentioned, the full report is in your package, and it goes over more detailed each neighborhood, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Norquist. I'll open it up to Cochran Council. Councillor McFadden.
Yeah, well done. Just for the clarification, I actually don't have any questions. You did a really great job. It's about 2,200 homes before we are out of water capacity. It was about 5 slides before the end, I think.
It was, here, I'll go back to the slide. So it's 2,200 homes that have yet to be subdivided. Okay, so we have around 800 that already have subdivision and are being built out right now. And then we can, again, approve that 2,200. Okay, so, sorry, yeah, so we've roughly 3,000 more homes. Yes. With our current water supply. Okay, yes. And I understand this is for 2021's full report. Do we have a sense, though, like my sense around the community right now is things are booming like never before. Do we have an idea of what the last 6 months looks like in that context? I know this is the 2021 snapshot, but my sense is the first half of the year was still very quiet, and then it's turned around rapidly since then. Do you have any sense of that you could share or no? Through the chair, it is hard. I like to do a year-to-year review because development does vary as the seasons do. But I would estimate that we would have a similar year to last year, as again we saw it was busy throughout, even in the winter months, and we're seeing a similar volume of applications. Maybe not quite as much, but it will still be very busy. Okay, thank you for that. And so, and I just need a reminder of the process of this tonight. So this is coming to the committee of the whole, so we're not making any, we're not adopting this for information. Does it come back to council for formal adoptions for the community to see it, or how does this report kind of enter our formal world? Yes, through the chair, this is only for your information for tonight and an opportunity to ask administration any questions. This report will be later posted to our website for the public to view. Okay, excellent. And well done, Mr. Norquist, on a really thorough report. I think the key learning is Cochran continues to be a desirable place to be, and people are moving here at rapid levels, and the real constraint is going to be water, and I'm sure that'll be another big conversation topic for our strategic planning session, so thank you.
Mr. Hyman, you have a comment?
Mr. Nordquist is very accurate. Last year at this time we had, for January and February, March's numbers are not complete. We had 83 units. So far in 2022, we have 76 units, so we're right at the same number. And I know in speaking with Mr. Perrin from Safety Codes, they're extremely busy. So the spring season is typically when we get busier. So I would say we're on pace for a similar year as to last year.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I just want to pick up on Councillor McFadden's question, so I'm trying to get my head around this. So in terms of approved lots, or I guess that's not the right term. Can you go to your summary page? I mean, that'll help me out. I'm just trying to, the balance between the dwellings versus water. Have we approved more potential dwellings than we have water?
So through the chair, just to clarify that, we currently have around 800 lots that have been approved and subdivided. And then when we look at total land supply that council has granted land use to, it does exceed the water license requirement, and we have about 14 to 16 years of land supply, though we would hit the water supply limit in 5 to 6. However, that land supply hasn't been subdivided yet or necessarily developed yet.
So council could, at some point, if we're not successful in acquiring additional water licenses, be able to say to a developer, no, we don't have an adequate water. Like, I guess from the public's perspective, we want to be sure that they're going to continue to have water for those current residences, and that we won't allow development to occur beyond our capacity to be able to provide water.
Yes, there will be still limits to what development can occur, and we do have a process which we do review each subdivision application individually before we grant a developer the right to subdivide the land and start building any new lots.
Okay, good. And then the second question that I think will come from the public is, if we have enough approved dwellings for 18 to 20 years, so estimated residential supply, why would we approve additional development?
Through the chair, that would be, I suppose, a question for council to best answer themselves. It is, again, a common practice to make sure that there is an available land supply to ensure that there's always room as development comes in. That number, again, can be either recommended by administration or set by council.
I think if I might add to that as well, I think that additional supply coming in, I think is then just evaluated on what it brings to the community, and if it's considered a desirable addition, council would approve it. If it's not, council would decline it in that. I don't think that is solely a question of supply. It may bring other character, it may bring other housing opportunities, it may bring commercial opportunities, and there may be just additional variables that might be considered as part of that. Although supply is one of them, it's just not the singular variable. I think that would drive that. And I think, as Mr. Norquist rightly identified, it would ultimately be council that would be making the determination as to whether or not that was the prerogative of the community to go in that direction.
Okay, I appreciate that. The last question I had was about industrial land. Is there anything in your summary that identifies what industrial lands we have available and what we might need in terms of a guesstimate, or is this just a history lesson in kind of what happened last year as opposed to looking forward?
Through the chair, yes, this is very much just a summary of what happened in 2021. We do break out non-residential permits as, again, unlike homes, most commercial and industrial uses need to go through the development permit process, and we can capture them fairly easily. About a quarter of the development the town reviewed last year was for those non-residential uses. As far as moving forward and looking to the future, estimating current commercial and industrial capacities is a bit more difficult and complex than simply estimating land use. We have collected various demographics and censuses that give us a good estimate of how Cochran has developed and what the intent is for those future lands. There are definitely areas that are identified for future employment areas, but I couldn't give you a specific supply off the top of my head for how many years it would supply.
Is that something to reasonably ask? I mean, like, I'm just curious. So we know the total estimate in terms of residential land supply. I'd like to know the total resident or industrial land supply. Maybe Mr. Corman.
Sorry, excuse me, through the chair. We are currently working on our growth management strategy, and that will give us a very good idea of what we have in store for industrial lands, what we need and anticipate for the future. And that process is starting right away. So we will be able to provide you with those numbers just later on in the year.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that is something really important for us to know as a council. And just one last question, not to belabor the point, but in terms of water, do industries, depending, I guess it depends on the industry, but do they typically use more water than a residential development?
Through the chair to Councillor Reid, it all depends on the type of development and the type of industry. So, again, that's it would be subject to the type of development that's proposed.
So the water estimation is not based, it's just on residential, not on industrial, whatever that average might be. Okay, thank you.
So as I look around, there's no other questions, but I do have one of my own, and kind of piggyback on what Councillor Reid was going towards. When it comes to water, obviously, we don't anticipate, I would hope, around the table that, that we're going to run out of water and not find a solution before the 5 to 6 years. But what happens if we get towards, say, the end of our council term and sitting around this table? How do we stop that growth, I guess, or decide, like, we don't have a solution, so now we need to start, I don't want to say backpedal, but to limit further development? What kind of solution do we have in place for that?
I think Mr. Norquist, I'll jump in there, if that's okay. He's like, that's above my pay grade. He's, I think the key there is that this is just identifying lands, and I think the key there is that where subdivision is not granted, it still remains inside the town's control, and so that we have the ability to decline subdivisions that would put us outside of what we would consider to be, tolerable limits for our current water licensing. So that is currently something that we feel comfortable that we have the ability to, manage effectively. Well, we think it's critical that we build a long-term water strategy that allows us to, be flexible in future growth, et cetera. In the short term, we feel that is in the purview of the town's ability to direct what happens there. It's not happening to us. We would decide how that happens.
And I imagine there'd be close eyes on that entire process as obviously time goes on, and watching the numbers and what that looks like. Councillor Nagel?
Do we approve stripping and grading before subdivision? Like, do we allow developers to clear entire areas before they have subdivision approval?
No, they need to get their subdivision approval in place.
Okay, stripping comes after. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Seeing that there are no more, sorry, I missed one apparently.
I just put it on, to be fair. Councillor Wilson's not here. He always does that to me. I was hoping to, we'll get him back. Is there another, just further to Councillor Fedeco's point about approving growth beyond water license? We do also have building permit ability to not issue a building permit, even on lands that are approved for subdivision. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I think maybe the best way to think about it is that there's theoretical growth and there's real growth. Theoretical growth is what we're talking about when we talk about the numbers, the land supply, the 20-year time horizon, versus real growth is what is approved and what we haven't approved yet. And that's, I think, where those decisions in terms of the impact on our water supply, et cetera, are made in terms of real growth, not theoretical growth. And this report, I think, is intended to capture more of that broader scope.
Yeah, I just didn't want to be talking about water in the sense that there's a house or a home that's been approved, or a building, then go to turn the tap on and no water would come out. That's not at all what we're contemplating. It's we have full control over those outcomes.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Seeing that there's no more lights on, take a look around. Thank you for the information, and we will let you go sit down for a little while.
Thank you.
And with that, we are moving on to 5C, the Active Transportation Fund, the ATF application, and I invite Ms. Lowe up to the podium, who is going to introduce Mr. Ham, the Director of Community Services.
I'll try to get us back to where we're supposed to be to. I will. Good evening, Mayor and Council. It is my sincere pleasure to be able to introduce you to our new director, Mitchell Ham. Director of Community Services. He joined our team roughly 6 weeks ago, and to say he's hit the ground running would probably be a significant understatement. He brings a passion for inspiring shared goals and positive cultural alignment, and has already proven to be an influential leader in our organization. Most recently, working for the town of Edson, his experience spans both the private and public sector, which provides a fresh lens and a systematic and analytical approach to policy and service level planning and deliverables. His ability to apply all of his experience to the unique opportunities we have here as we invigorate our corporate services division is a huge asset to our organization and the community, and we're definitely pleased to have him as part of our team. So I'm going to turn the podium over to Mr. Ham this evening. He can share a few words, and then he will lead into his presentation.
Welcome, Mr. Ham.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Just happy to join everyone tonight and take my first crack at presenting to this wonderful council. I'm really happy to join the town, and this organization is such a positive, wonderful place to work. So I really can't hope for anything more in my professional career. I'm just happy to raise my young family in the Beau Valley and foothills. So thank you. Administration's been working in collaboration with Bike Cochran to submit a plan to Infrastructure Canada's Active Transportation Fund. The grant is intended to assist communities in their shift towards more active transportation opportunities in support of Canada's National Active Transportation Strategy. A bit of an overview of the Active Transportation Plan. It's funded by Infrastructure Canada. It's $400 million over 5 years. There's 2 funding streams as it stands right now. The first is a planning and design stream. It's 100% funded, up to $50,000 on the first installment. The second is capital projects up to 60% funded, and that's up to $50 million. So the first intake deadline is right away here, which is why we're in front of you today. It's a quick turnaround for March 31st. And then we will be looking for we'll be bringing this in front of council next week for a potential resolution. The studies portion of the application for this will be more of a focus on our traffic bylaw and updating our traffic bylaw to include our bicycle controls, pathway design standards, wayfinding standards, and our enforcement and safety portions, as well as multimodal roads, pathways, and sidewalks, and how we address the right-of-way issues that we're seeing already in town today. A lot of the focus here is just really consolidating some of the information that we have into one place, as well as updating the traffic bylaw, which is clearly out of date. The second portion in the capital funding is the pathways, paving pathways in this north-south pathway system. I was going to say corridor here, but I feel like after 2 presentations ago, we'll just avoid corridor. But yeah, the north-south trail system. So the first portion of it is the Glenville Park pathway system. It's about 2 kilometers of pathway system that is currently shale and gravel. As you can see here, we have some issues with some of the connection pieces, as well as not being paved, so it makes it difficult for accessibility. Key considerations for the project are the highway interchanges, both on the 1A and Highway 22. Working with Alberta Transportation and within our own network and by Cochran, we feel with assistance in engineering, we'll be able to find some creative solutions through there, as well as connecting the tri-site development. The other portion is connecting the ranch to the highway and pave the trails through the ranch, and potentially creating a connection to the tri-schools. Key considerations here are drainage slope and the Fire Smart plan that will be affecting the area connecting to the tri-site schools. Here's some more pictures. The total cost of the paving project is about $1.15 million. Our 40% portion of that is about $460,000. There is a financial breakdown here, and I can provide that to council if needed. The second portion of the capital projects that we were considering bringing forward was our wayfinding portion of the project. This would be signage and maps throughout town to indicate trails and pathway systems throughout town, not just the areas that are focused on in the initial portion of the project. And the estimated cost of this is approximately $134,000. That is an estimate based on what our design standards will eventually be through the study portion of this program. So that may scale back the project in size depending on where we end up on our design standards for wayfinding. The town's portion for this would be $53,600. So this is kind of the financial breakdown. The total cost of all projects, or the total investment of all the projects would be about $1,334,000, and the town's portion for 40% of the applicable projects would be $513,600. So project outcomes, we're really looking for synergies in the community to connect community, multimodal pathways, really focusing on the tri-site, also safe travel from the tri-schools and other community areas. We have the station also involved in that conversation. But really it's work with Infrastructure Canada's focusing on is the healthy and active community, having year-round access to trails, reducing road congestion, and updating some of our internal policies to get some clear and concise standards so we can work with our developers in the future, and those standards can be carried forward in every aspect of our development and growth. Just a little thing that we want to start looping into our project planning is our operations and maintenance costs and the increase in costs that are going to come along with capital projects and increase in our assets. So we do have some of that information available to us. So snow clearing is $2,000 per kilometer per year. That's a rough estimation for our park staff. But when we come to life cycling, once we have a design standard, then we can have a maintenance life cycle program, which will help us estimate these costs so that council can consider these costs into our operational costs going forward. And then just an added note, there are municipal programs, so that, like the electric vehicles for municipalities program, that creates opportunities for us to invest in our community through other ways, like adding equipment to our fleet. But we have to be cognizant of the fact that those also will have repair costs and maintenance costs as well. So each of these things is, although beneficial, we just want to take into consideration all the aspects. What I'll be looking for tonight is kind of a general idea of where we want to go with this. We will be moving forward with the application for the grant because of the tight deadline. We want to get in before everyone else meets that very tight deadline. But we will have the opportunity to withdraw the application if it does not pass resolution. Any questions?
Thank you for the information. Councillor McFadden?
Yeah, great, thank you very much. Really exciting opportunity, for sure. And I think through COVID, of course, our communities realize more and more how important our trails are. And I really appreciated kind of the whole life cycle perspective that you put on that, and what the operational cost will be on that. It's very thorough. My question really is two questions. We mentioned Bike Cochran as part of this, if you could just expand on that for me. And there's just the timeline between, we're gonna be applying on it right away, hopefully, and then when we might be able to hear the results of that, and then when we might actually, barring the results of that, be able to act on this. So timelines and Bike Cochran's role.
Yeah, excellent. We'll start with Bike Cochran because that's probably the easier of the two, and neither of them are easy. Bike Cochran's an association in town here that acts on behalf of the public and biking and using pathways and trail systems in general. They've really moved forward with administration in terms of highlighting opportunities for administration to improve spaces. It's a association in town where we can build relationships with the community, and they act on behalf of the public in a lot of ways that we don't necessarily have a lens on as administration, just in terms of usage of space. So this is an opportunity to interact with people that are using the spaces.
If I could just augment Mr. Ham's answer to the Bike Cochran involvement in this. Council may recall it did come up during budget deliberations. I know that Bike Cochran did meet with many of you, if not all, about their very ambitious plan around both existing pathways and new. What this current application will do is it will maximize the current existing trails that we have, ensuring that all of the trails in our community are paved, and it replaces all of the existing red shell and asphalt and gravel with an asphalt paved pathway. We have met with the Paul Perot of Bike Cochran several times, and this is just the first step in achieving and realizing some of the goals that they have in expanding our trails and our pathways in our community. And then we will continue to work with that group as they gather their information and their data and provide that to the town. It is an excellent relationship that we have with them right now as far as the data that they're able to provide to us and some of the information that they're able to provide.
Okay, so just to summarize Bike Cochran's role, then it was just, because I think, yeah, we all met with them, just helping us identify the opportunity and then also kind of identifying the needs that the opportunity met.
Absolutely, and we've been meeting with them just to make sure that what we are applying for is achievable with the current resources that we have, and not only financial resources, obviously, but staffing resources as we continue to build the department. And so, yeah, it's the first step of more to come.
Okay, yeah, great news and great that we were able to find a way to work with Bike Cochran, which have been amazing champions. So anyway, thank you for that. So part two.
Yeah, part two. I think that's a more difficult question to answer. I think that grant intake with a tight timeline like this and such a large grant, there will be many applications, and so I think those timelines will be set out by Infrastructure Canada over time.
So it's really easy to answer, actually.
Doesn't feel good answering that way? How about that?
That's okay. So yeah, so we're gonna get the application as quickly as we can, and then like any grant, it's outside of our control. But do we know when? Have they indicated when we're gonna get results back? Like by the end of the year, or?
I think it's going to be contingent on when we get it in, because it's a very tight timeline. I have to imagine that many municipalities want to take part in this. It's a fairly large grant process. My experience with Infrastructure Canada is that it will be at least till the end of the year.
Before we hear back?
Possibly, yeah.
Okay, all right, thanks for that, and we'll see how we go, fingers crossed.
Councillor Reid?
Thank you. Well, first of all, welcome to Cochran, and welcome you, Mitch, you and your family. I'm glad to have you join us, and wow, what an introduction. I don't know how you could follow that. That being said, I'm really glad that you referenced the maintenance ongoing costs, because oftentimes I think we forget that while this is a golden opportunity, there is also an associated cost that comes along with that. You know, I think about one of my experiences in my career where we were asked the government for, this was in a university setting, asked for money for a building, and they gave us the money for the building, but then we couldn't afford to keep the lights on or heat it. But so it's really important that when you have these kind of presentations that we actually see that, you know, or at least have an idea that there's an associated cost, ongoing cost, both in terms of maintenance. Speaking about money, I was just curious where the money was coming from in terms of this town's proportion.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks to you, thank you, Councillor Reid. So thankfully, we have a fine executive director of finance. It's just handing over $500,000 from MSI funding to fund this. So that's where it'll be funded from, is MSI.
It's coming from where?
MSI.
And what else could we have possibly used that for, just out of curiosity?
The MSI grant is a general grant that, from the province of Alberta. There are some parameters around capital projects, but the money that I have recommended for this, for our town portion, has not been taken away from any other project that it's already earmarked for. It's funds that we have not allocated as yet.
Okay, cool. And then I had one other question and a comment. Are there any environmental concerns as it relates to the Glenville Park paving, such as the creek and flooding and so forth?
Excellent. I think the best way to answer that is to say that that'll be part of the engineering that will be included in the capital project itself. And so we will be able to establish those answers throughout.
Okay. Yeah, and then the comment is that this whole project, at least for me personally, and I suspect other members of the council, is really music to our ears. We have been talking for some time about, you know, connectivity in terms of our community, and I think to make it accessible for all members of our community is a great stride forward. So I'm really excited about this project.
Excellent, thank you.
Mayor Janung?
Councillor Reid stole my entire comment right at the very end there. So well done, Councillor Reid. Yeah, welcome, Mitch, to the crew. It's I've had the opportunity to interact with you a few times around the hallways. I would concur with Ms. Lowe. You've been a positive influence in the interactions I've had with you, and I And similar to what Councillor Reid said, welcome to Cochran, and I'm glad you chose, I'm glad we chose each other to, further your career here. So, I mean, it is kind of an iterative process, interviewing somebody there. I feel that your interview, well, the candidate, I'm really off track here, but the candidate is interviewing the town at the same time, so it's a mutual thing. So welcome anyways. And I'm not usually this far off on a tangent, but. That's not true. Yeah. Anyways, a very exciting project. Similar to what Councillor Reid was saying, I think we've talked about similar projects. We've talked about connecting our community. It is a council priority, and it's exciting to have a real, tangible way of proving it to the community that we're serious about this. And yeah, I'm full support of the application, obviously. But couple things that I would say, and first of all, thank you to you and your team, and to Bike Cochran, the volunteer organization that's Councillor McFadden already pointed out the relationship there. I appreciate those individuals doing the work that they're doing to highlight some of this stuff that we can act on. I personally have had concerns from residents on all of the trails that were outlined about some of the issues that you've already highlighted about, a bridge connecting to a shale path and, water or tripping hazards, etc. So this would address all of that. So that's exciting. And even with a recent meeting Mr. Derricott and I had with Garmin, they're asking of the town, what is it that we are doing tangibly to facilitate a community that is welcoming to individuals that might call Garmin their place of work, and these types of things are exactly what they're talking about. So it checks a lot of boxes. I guess the one comment I would have, and it's similar to what Councillor McFadden was questioning around if we're successful, when, so you've answered that, but if not successful, could we see this project on a capital project list in an upcoming budget?
Thank you, Mayor. I think that's a loaded question. I'm usually not this nervous if it makes you guys feel any better, but first time in front of a council, so here we are. It's a simple answer. It's really up to council if we're going to move forward with something like this. I believe that it does answer a lot of the questions that are asked of council, of administration in the community, and I think the opportunities are to get this grant in the first installment are great. In a second installment are fairly good, and so it's possible that we might be able to establish some of the other questions we have with grade and slope and drainage, and be able to move forward with even further enhancements out of this grant. So that's my thoughts.
If I could add to Mr. Ham's answer, I would suggest that this is something that we see as an important connection piece for our community, not simply for groups like Bike Cochran, but from an accessibility perspective. Yeah. So as we're building community services, and we do have Mr. LaFlèche's new scope of work, which is community connectivity. That is about how are we connecting both not just from able-bodied individuals, but as well as making sure that wheelchairs and those with accessibility needs are being met throughout the community. So it is something that's a priority for us as we start looking at our pathways. I think certainly the Parks and Recreation Committee as well, this would be an area that they have brought forward through their discussions several times, these two areas around the ability to use, whether it's electronic wheelchairs or otherwise, for those areas. So, and then additionally to that, with the wayfinding is intended to be placed throughout the community, throughout our pathways and trails that are existing. So amplifying the impacts that those have, being one of the greatest assets that we have as a community. And the other thing that we intend to have incorporated into that is the emergency marker designation. So a couple of years ago, fire services did go through an exercise of making sure that all of our pathways had identification numbers and letters throughout, so that if somebody is injured on a pathway system, they know where they are when they're calling for service. And I think that the wayfinding signs will provide us the opportunity to include that, as well as the other information that will be included in those. So all of that to say, long-winded answer of saying, yes, I believe that it is something that's important enough to our community that you would probably see something like this in consideration of a capital project in the future, if not funded through this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification and the context and the answer. I know it was a bit of a loaded question, and I guess it was my way of saying I hope that we can see this on a future budget, that I think it is that important, that we contemplate it in the grander scheme of things. So, but yeah, thank you. And again, welcome.
Councillor Flowers.
Yes, welcome to Cochran.
Thank you.
This would be a great news story for our community if we could get all this work done. And I think working with Bike Cochran, they've got great information, and I'm sure the application will shine in the pile of applications. My one question was, did you say that we would be doing a traffic bylaw review?
Yes, that is the study portion of the $50,000 that would be funded out of the study portion of the grant. Would go to reviewing the traffic bylaw and including a lot of the multimodal accessibility throughout town as well.
Would that include sound?
If sound is a part of our traffic bylaw currently, it will likely be part of that going forward.
Okay. I know that we heard a lot of complaints last summer about the sound in motorbikes and trucks and the parks and just being a nuisance. And the bike controls, the right-of-way issues, a lot of these things would be addressed by all this work, so I'm hoping that it really happens. Thank you.
Councillor Nagel?
I have very little to add, but welcome to Cochran, and I'm very supportive of this initiative. That's
Thank
it.
you.
Somebody needs to be nice. Well done.
Councillor Nagel usually says way more than that.
Now that I look around, there's no more questions. I do have a couple questions of my own. You did say that I believe that we could apply, or communities could go towards $50 million in capital funding costs. Is there a reason why we're only going for the 1.334? Is it a timeline issue? So like, do those projects have to be completed within X amount of time, which is why we didn't suggest to go for $5 million or pick up, like, we have just like Councillor Reid said, we have lots of projects and pathways that we could probably add, but is that the reason why we aren't adding more?
It's a bit of a two-part reason. One of them is the specifics of the grant is shovel ready, and we consider existing pathways to be considered shovel ready, and that the engineering involved with doing overlay is pretty minimal. The second part of it is we actually don't have a great design standard for our pathway systems. We mirror them to the city of Calgary, but we have a lot more interesting slopage and in Cochran, and I would say that it creates challenges for accessibility, and so there's a hope that in the first installment that we would establish some very clear guidelines and standards for our pathways, so that moving forward we would have made for Cochran solutions for these types of slopes.
Gotcha. When it comes to the ridge shale path, and I totally appreciate Mayor Janung's comment about the safety issues, but it's kind of something that's also known in our town, right? Especially within Glenville community. Was there any kind of consultation, or will there be some sort of engagement with residents just in that area as to what their thoughts are? I certainly understand the safety, but it's also part of kind of our heritage and history.
I can assist if you would like. Specific engagement, no. At this point, the town has not undertaken any specific engagement with that community. I can say that the red shale pathways are extremely difficult to maintain. So not only is it from an accessibility perspective, but it's from a maintenance perspective as well. They do present a challenge because there is a lot of compaction, as well as just the sheer fact that they're not asphalted, and they don't hold up like a gravel pathway would. So that's why we only have a very small portion left in our community. That's why we've gone through the process of upgrading those, and so there are maintenance challenges. Certainly the water permeability will be something that will have to be factored into the engineering, but they are a challenge to maintain.
Perfect, thank you.
If I may just add to that, I think there's an opportunity to consider capturing the historical piece there inside, whether it's, I don't want to get too broad here, but, the naming of a section of the trail or et cetera, and capturing that heritage, but also acknowledging that standard of trail is just not serving the community appropriately anymore, not the least of which is red shale is actually one of the most expensive products in terms of aggregate now, and you'll even see in terms of baseball diamonds, et cetera, are moving away from red shale to other products because it is not only difficult in maintenance, but it's actually really expensive to acquire as well. So.
Perfect, thank you for the detailed explanation, that's good. I don't have any other questions. I was one of the counselors that met with by Cochran, and you know, they've put so much effort into trying to bring this forward and have it considered, so I'm happy to support it as well. Councillor Reid?
Yeah, just an aside, the question of the red shale. So this isn't to do with your presentation, but I wanted to note it. So the red shale from Glen Eagles into Glenville Park, that needs some attention at some point. I mean, aside from the cost, it's been washed away and there are all kinds of problems with it, but if somebody could note that on their to-do list.
I do believe that is an area that we have been discussing with respect to the red shale located there as well.
So I don't see any more questions. Mr. Ham, do you have what you need to bring this forward next week for resolution?
Absolutely, thank you.
Perfect, thank you. And welcome to the team again.
Thanks for having me.
So I was looking forward to hitting the gavel a little harder, maybe than what I did when I first came in. I won't be hitting it tonight because we have an in-camera item. And so I am looking for a motion for council to go in camera. Councilor Reid, call the question. And good night.